Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the third edition of the Access and Awareness webinar series hosted by the Federal Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice. Today's webinar is entitled From Home to School and Back Again, Creating Safe and Healthy Environments for Children. I'm Dr. Siobhan Tarver-Whitlock. I'm a physical scientist with the EPA Region 4 Office of Environmental Justice and Sustainability in Atlanta. I'll be moderating today's webinar. I'd like to welcome back all participants who have previously been on the line with us. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. Our goal is to reach as many communities as possible, so please pass along information about the Access and Awareness webinar series. This series is a monthly event. It aims to provide public access to the Interagency Working Group and increase awareness of federal agency strategies, programs, and holistic community-based solutions to address environmental justice issues. This series also works to foster a deeper understanding of how federal agencies are collaborating on environmental justice and what resources are available to anyone interested in improving the health, quality of life, and economic opportunities in overburdened communities. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. We have 5 wonderful speakers who are going to be providing you with information about federal agencies' work and resources related to children's environmental health. If you look at the left of your screen, there's a box for webinar feedback. We're interested in hearing directly from our stakeholders about topics you're interested in hearing about for future webinars. Please enter any ideas at any point during today's session. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. So Executive Orders 12898 on EJ and 13045 on children's health are 2 long-standing and complementary rules that commit the federal family to the prevention and reduction of harmful exposures and health risks for children and for underserved, disproportionately impacted, low-income, minority, and tribal communities. They also work to support community efforts to build healthy, sustainable, green neighborhoods. President Obama has called upon families, educators, health professionals, faith-based and community organizations, and all levels of government to help ensure America's children are healthy. October is Children's Health Month, for those of you who may not have known. The first Monday in October was designated as Child Health Day. And so for Children's Health Month, the EJ IWG's Access and Awareness webinar series is working to raise awareness of technical assistance and federal resources that support children's environmental health in vulnerable communities. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box on the middle left-hand side of your screen in the box that's entitled Q&A. We will take questions after each presentation. If you are calling into the conference line, please place your phone on mute at this time. And so with that, we'll move on to our first presenter. Sandra Howard is the Senior Environmental Health Advisor with the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health with the United States Department of Health and Human Services. She'll be providing information today on the President's Task Force on Environmental Health Risks and Safety Risks to Children. Sandra, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I have the mic, and I want to say good afternoon to everyone and to thank the members of the team who put this together. I know these things are kind of complicated, and that you're doing a series is something that I appreciate greatly. So thank you to Janine, Siobhan, and everybody else who's been on the team to put this one together. And it's so timely to do this. Since it is Children's Health Month, I just came back from an event that celebrated Children's Health Month, and at which time the President's Task Force that I'm going to be talking about launched its new website. The website is so new that I didn't even get a chance to put the address into these slides, and unfortunately it's not one that's really intuitive, so I'll have to try to spell it out for you at the end. So with that, I'll try to figure out how to move the slides. Oh, wait, I think I saw it. There we go. Okay. So I am, as was mentioned, the Senior Advisor in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health at the Department, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and I advise the Assistant Secretary and really anybody who's on the senior leadership for the Department of Health and Human Services. And I lead an environmental health team. I chair the HHS Environmental Justice Working Group, and I also serve as the representative from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Federal EJ IWG. I'm appearing today mainly in my capacity as co-chair of the Senior Staff Steering Committee of the President's Task Force on Environmental Health Risks and Safety Risks to Children, which I'll just call President's Task Force or Children's Environmental Health Task Force. But I also never take my environmental justice hat off, and there are many intersections between the work of the task force and environmental justice, which I think of as EJ for Children. Plus, there aren't millions of federal employees who work on environmental public health, so a lot of us see each other at both kinds of meetings and events, and there's opportunities for us to collaborate across agency lines, which many people refer to as silos, but I think we're working toward breaking down some of those silos and work together collaboratively, which was the point of the task force. So let me move on here. So the federal family has been collaborating across agencies to address children's health concerns linked to environmental factors for many years. Certainly since 1997, when President Bill Clinton established the President's Task Force by executive order. The task force serves as a focal point for federal agencies to address the chemical, biological, and social stressors that threaten the health of children. The executive order names the HHS Secretary and the EPA Administrator as co-chairs. A total of 17 federal agencies and White House offices make up the task force. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, the buttons don't, you have to move it around to show up the button. So, okay, here's the membership of the task force. All of these agencies except one were specified in the original executive order. The Department of Homeland Security had not been established at that point in 1997, but we know that children can be disproportionately impacted by disasters and other events. And the Department of Homeland Security houses FEMA and other organizations that respond to these disasters. So we wanted to make sure that they came on board with us, and they have. So the work of the subcommittee, the work of the task force subcommittees that are of interest to environmental stakeholders are pictured here in the slide, which I hope is the print's big enough for you to read it. We identified the task force actually, as I mentioned, was set up in 1997, and they continued working even throughout the administration. Even when the administration changed, it wasn't as visible as it had been. So the Obama administration actually, when it came, decided to reignite the task force. And when it did so, we set up at least, let me see, three of the subcommittees that are pictured on this organizational chart here. Asthma was identified early on as an area that was ripe for collaborations among agencies. It had the highest level of support from the administrator of EPA and the Secretary of HHS at that time, and continues to do so. We also have a very good partnership with HUD, and they are also in the lead on the Healthy Settings Subcommittee, which is over to the right on your screen. And there is quite a connection between asthma and healthy settings, particularly the home and, of course, schools. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization there. We know that with regard to housing, poor housing conditions are associated with poor health outcomes, and this is very true for asthma. We know that minority and children in low-income families are disproportionately affected by asthma and also are disproportionately found in housing situations with environmental hazards. There is a strategy that the Asthma Work Group has put forward. I call it for short the Asthma Disparities Action Plan, but the full title is there in the top box. Healthy Settings also has a strategy that it's been implementing that addresses hazards found in the house like indoor air quality, pest management, and toxic exposures to substances such as lead. We set up a chemical exposures group, and that serves as a forum for talking about amongst the agencies various types of exposures. It wasn't necessarily focused on one in particular, but kind of as they came up, we talked about how we could collaborate on those chemicals. Climate change was not one of the original ones, but about 3 years ago we saw the opportunity to work together to identify and address the unique risks that children face in a changing climate. And that led us to to hold an expert consultation to identify some of these risks that are known in the scientific literature. And that information was used in a major project, a major assessment by the U.S. Global Research Program, a climate and health assessment, has a special emphasis on children as a result of that. And that group also last year held a policy roundup that collected stories and other information about policies and actions that communities were taking with regard to climate change and children's health. And these stories are now printed on our brand new website. And we had just announced today that we were reopening that solicitation. So between now and January, you have an opportunity, if your community is doing something, to send it to the website where there'll be an address that you can send it to. And we might be able to publish that once the deadline is passed in January. So on the far left, at about, I don't know, it would be about 10 o'clock, there is a lead group that is in a box, and we are just standing that up. It is one of the priorities that we've identified in the task force work plan going forward, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But you can certainly understand why we would conclude that that is something that we really must collaborate on in the interest of children. At this point, we are trying to put together a compilation of just where we are as a federal family on that, what our activities are, and hopefully that material will be available in the not-too-distant future, and that will lead us to discuss how we're going to go forward together moving on. Okay, so in October of 2015, I think it was, the time is really flying, but I think it was 2015, the task force, it was October 2015, the task force principals got together and tasked the Senior Staff Steering Committee to identify priorities and develop a work plan of things that we're going to do in the short term, midterm, and long term, which we did, and we, not surprisingly, dealing with lead exposures rose to the top pretty quickly, and I explained what we were doing with that. Another thing that continued to be a focal point for us in the coming years and months is going to be protecting children's health in a changing climate. The third thing, it has a lot of things in it, but we know there are a lot of other illnesses that have environmental determinants, and we want to make sure that those get addressed as well. Okay, so underpinning this, and we've learned a lot really from environmental justice work. And underpinning this is going to be communication and engagement with the public and stakeholders. We know that there's got to be meaningful community engagement in all phases of policy development and implementation. So steps that we're going to take to do this really have been furthered by our new website. And along with that, there is also a mailing list where you'd be able to get information that we're disseminating, whether it's new studies or new funding opportunities or events that are happening. They should be listed there as well. And we're trying to build a federal community of practice, and we will be reaching out, particularly with regard to lead, to stakeholders to get a sense of where they think we should move next on that. I think that will be an activity that will go on for several months. So I think that's basically it for me. As I mentioned, I co-chaired this with Ruth Etzel. She was not able to be on this call. She's with the Children's, she's at EPA in the Children's Protections Office. I know her staff person, Ted, is on the phone, and I want to thank him and Chanya Liv for helping us, helping me participate in this today. I mentioned the task force website. I have a feeling we're probably going to have to try to send it around at some point, but I will tell you it's HTTP, and I know you're probably all familiar with that, // and here it is. P is in president, T is in task, F is in force, C is in children, E is environment, H is in health, .NIEHS, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, who is hosting this and put this together for us, .NIH, National Institutes of Health, .gov. So that is where I conclude. I know that there's going to be some more attention to lead coming up in the next presentation.
Thank you, Sandy. And we will be sure to make sure that everyone gets that website. It's exciting to hear that there's now a place where we can find some more information. And so with that, we'll take our first question. And just a reminder to everyone that's listening, again, you have the Q&A pod. Please feel free to enter your questions as you go along, as you think of those. So our first question to you, Sandy, is transportation addressed in any of those subcommittees that you highlighted during your presentation?
Let me think. It wouldn't be in settings. Well, I'm not sure what aspect of transportation. To the extent that it affects air quality, I suppose you can consider that one form of addressing it. But we do have some representatives from the Department of Transportation, and we expect that they're going to be engaged in the work plan going forward. I'm not sure that's what the questioner means, though. And so if she is able to flesh that out a little bit more, I'd try to help.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. We'll look to get more information from that person that submitted that question. If you could flesh that out a little bit, we can try to follow up later on in the presentation to get that answered for you. Are there any other, if you have any other questions, please submit those again through the pod. Also, I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to the bottom box pod for resources and materials. We have several different resources that we've provided to you today, including the presentation. There's a report provided by our DOT partners, which will go along with their presentation, as well as some resources that are tied to each individual agency member of the Interagency Working Group.
Well, I know we're going to hear from the Department of Transportation later, so maybe there's an opportunity for us to cross-talk about that, too, afterwards.
Okay, definitely, definitely. Thank you, Sandy. So moving along, We'll move on to our next set of presenters, which are my EPA colleagues from the Great Lakes region. We have Alan Walt, who is the Director of the Office of Environment and Compliance Assurance.
Hello.
And joining him, thank you, Alan, and joining him will be Tammy Moore. She's a Senior Environmental Scientist with the Land and Chemicals Division, also in Region 5. Alan will be sharing some information with us on EPA's efforts to effectively coordinate environmental justice and children's health issues and initiatives. And then Tammy will provide an overview of the lead program and ways to reduce childhood lead exposures. So without further ado, we'll have Alan and then Tammy.
Thank you, and good to speak with everybody today. So I just did want to say a few words about renewed efforts to coordinate between the Children's Health and Environmental Justice programs, recognizing the important intersections you've already heard a little bit about. There is a memo that Dr. Ruth Etzel and from the Office of Children's Health Protection and Matt Tejada from the Office of Environmental Justice at EPA put out on April 12th of this year. And that addresses a number of ways in which we can strengthen partnerships with communities working together to protect children in overburdened and vulnerable communities, as well as resources including contact lists and a set of specific resources and opportunities that can be used in that collaboration. So I encourage folks to check that out. Within Region 5, we've been following that lead and coordinating closely between our Environmental Justice Program, which I manage in our Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, and our Children's Health Program. And for example, the Children's Health Program is working closely with us to lay the groundwork for an effort to comprehensively eliminate childhood lead poisoning in Flint and other communities across Region 5. And Tammy Moore, who you'll hear from in just a moment now, has also been working with us, presenting information on healthy homes and organizing healthy homes trainings in Flint. So that's just one example of the kind of work that we can do together by coordinating between the environmental justice and children's health programs. So with that, I'll turn over to Tammy to talk to us about how to eliminate lead exposure in the environment and protect children's health.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tammy Moore, and I am a lead expert here at US EPA Region 5. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about ways to eliminate lead from the environment when dealing with children. So we'll start off with a little bit of background on what lead is. It is a heavy bluish-gray metal that occurs naturally in the Earth's crust. And it was used a lot during, for manufacturing because of its different characteristics. It's weather resistant, corrosion resistant, it has a low melting point, and it's very easy to work with. So from the regulatory perspective, since this is EPA, it was basically, there was a gradual phase down of lead in gasoline first. It started in 1973, and it was gradually phased down in 1986. And then in 1996, the Clean Air Act banned the sale of small amounts, the remaining small amount of leaded fuel that was still available in some parts of the country for on-road use vehicles. And when I say on-road use, that's like the average car or truck that's on the road today. However, there is still leaded gasoline that is used by aircrafts, racing cars, or any other off-use type of vehicles. And in 1977, lead was banned from paint for consumer use. But again, just like gas, you can still find paint today for outdoor use that still has lead in it, and also cable and wire. So the next photo I have is just a picture of the different sources of lead in the environment for kids and where they can be exposed. To this day, lead is still an issue in paint and the dust from the paint, also dust on the floor from tracking, from soil from outdoors. We've also experienced our issues with lead in drinking water from plumbing. And also outdoors, lead is still an issue in soil, as I said before, flaking paint from the houses and also from deposition from the air. So why is this such an issue? Why is lead such an issue for children? Well, it's all around them. It's in their environment constantly, whether it's in something they may be eating or drinking, from breathing or inhaling the dust, or also touching things that may have dust or lead soil on it. So I want to start off first by talking about the indoor sources of lead, which is, one of the issues that one of the main exposures for kids and still is today. And it's mainly the lead dust. So if you have a house that was built before 1978, there's a high chance that there's still lead paint under the paint that may be, recently painted on top of that lead-based paint. So if that paint is disturbed or painting or chipping or whatnot, that lead dust can still be released and considered a source. And also, there has been lots of lead found in kids' toys, vinyl lunch boxes, a lot of imported items. In addition to that, antique furniture, even cribs where babies sleep. Additional indoor sources of lead can come from hobbies that people have. It's been found in cosmetics, unfortunately, lipstick as well. If you work in a lead smelter industry or any type of industry where you're dealing with lead, you can also bring it home into the house, and it could be on clothes or your shoes. And also from recent, issues in the news, you guys know that it can still be in your drinking water due to old leaded pipes. But I do want to hammer home that still the major source of lead is from paint and old varnishes in the paint. So if possible, that's where you should reduce the exposure, because that is still the highest source of lead in kids' environments. The other issue I want to talk about is lead in soil, which is something that we're dealing with right now in Region 5. It can be a problem because if kids are, outside playing in soil that's not covered, it can be brought into the house if, the kids track it in on their feet, or even if there's pets that play in the soil that's covered, and it could be problematic. Not so much of an issue because of lead's characteristics. It likes to absorb to soil, but sometimes it can be found in groundwater as well. Also, in addition to, the indoor and outdoor sources, if there is livestock that is being exposed to the soil, if humans eat that livestock, they can be exposed to lead that way. Again, in the soil, it can be from historical gasoline usage and also from deposition from historical industrial facilities such as lead smelters. So why is lead such an issue with kids? Well, it has a lot of detrimental health effects, and it can cause hyperactivity, speech disorders, childhood delinquency, learning disabilities, various health problems, behavioral disorders, and reduction in their IQ. And this has a ripple effect on society because it's a cost to the child's future, but it's also a cost to society because of the health care issues that may come up, joblessness, special education, and then juvenile issues. So as we know, there's really no good, safe level of lead in the blood, and it really has no physiological relevant role. What it actually does is it blocks the role of a lot of really good things such as calcium, iron, and zinc, and that's one of the issues with lead in kids. Also, just to reiterate that, it causes damage to the brain, to the nervous system. It can cause learning disorders, hyperactivity, lower IQ, delayed growth, and other problems such as headache and hearing loss. And, those of us who work in the lead world, we know this, is that kids are most susceptible, and so are pregnant women. But I think, I don't know what's going on right now. I know I'm working on a couple of lead issues here where, we have a lot of adults that are coming in to get tested, but we hope that those of you guys who work at agencies or health departments, if you're on this call, just to still get that message out there that lead affects kids and babies, more because of their smaller body mass, their behavior, because of their hand-to-mouth movement, and then the fact that their bodies are still growing versus adults who, their bodies are already developed. So the kids have the most detrimental health effects from lead. And just to, again, reiterate, kids are not little adults because of this, their rapid growth and development and how their body works. They're going to have different health effects, and so they have an increased vulnerability to the health effects of lead. as I said before, there is no safe level of lead in the blood. Right now, the reference value is 5 micrograms per deciliter, and I think I'm going to say on the next slide that people should make sure that the kids get tested. Again, if you look at the levels of lead in the blood, even at 5, you have attention deficits and IQ loss, but as it goes up, even at 150 micrograms per deciliter, you can have death. So there really is no safe levels of lead in the blood. For kids, they ingest and absorb 50% of the lead in the blood versus adults at 10 micrograms, at 10%. And another thing that kids can do to prevent a lot of the detrimental health effects of lead is to have a healthy diet where they are, eating things that are high in iron, calcium, zinc, and vitamin C. So that's another message that we try to get out as far as, at least making it difficult for the lead to be absorbed into the blood. So again, kids are exposed to different environments, and this stuff is all around us right now. I mean, even if a lot of the headway that we've made at the agency as far as the regulations, we still have a lot of legacy contamination, whether it's in things such as the lead pipes or the soil where there used to be a lot of industrial deposition or even fill that was used in the soil. And still to this day, 61 to 76 of the exposure of lead is in the home. So that's why it's important to talk about, lead poisoning prevention as far as paint. That's still the highest culprit, and I don't want that message to get lost, even though we've been having a lot of issues with drinking water and soil. So what are the primary routes of exposure? Ingestion, as you know, like I said before in the presentation, kids putting their hands in their mouth with lead dust or soil. They may chew on items that have lead or that's contaminated with lead. They may drink water that's contaminated with lead or incidentally ingest it by playing in soil or playing outdoors. They can inhale it. They can inhale the dust. They can inhale the particles of soil. Even if it's gardening or a person that may be outside just playing with their kids or gardening, they can inhale the soil that way. And again, I do want to reiterate that exposure prevention, always use lead-safe work practices when you're renovating a house or repairing a house or painting your house. Make sure there are no peeling or chipping surfaces that can create lead dust in the home. If you have older windows, please convey the message to make sure that people are maintaining those, and also to use practices where you're constantly cleaning your floors and window sills or other surfaces where soil or dust can collect. And other ways to prevent exposure, like I said, in the different lead cases that we're dealing with here in Region 5, we have SOPs for the public on, making sure that they keep their houses clean, which most people do, and that's not an insult to anybody, but just to be extra precautious of any places where dust can collect and make sure that you keep those surfaces clean and wiped down. Kids' toys, any place where the kids play, make sure that if you have any type of soil or anywhere in your yard or front yard where there's bare soil, make sure that that's covered. And if you are concerned in any way, type, form, or fashion about lead being in your drinking water, you can always use a filter. You can use the filter on the actual faucets, or you can use like one of those Brita pitchers that you can just keep in your refrigerator that'll filter the water to prevent any exposure to lead. Again, because this is EPA, we do have the renovation, repair, and painting rule, and just to reiterate that if you guys do any type of renovation, that you do it right. We have information on our website. I think I have those links later on in the presentation. But, no matter what you do, just to minimize dust, because that is the culprit of where those lead particles can be. And also, again, because we're dealing with a site where we have soil issues, lead and soil issues, that if there are concentrations of lead in the soil that are greater than 400 parts per million, do not allow the kids to play in the soil if they're under the age of 6. Cover any bare soil surfaces. You can actually use mulch to cover those surfaces too. We do want to make sure that folks are not gardening in that soil. I know that in a lot of EJ communities, gardening is huge, but try to shop more at your farmer's market, or if you do garden, use a raised bed. And also, always remove your shoes when coming in the house so you don't track any of that stuff in. And also to wash your toys, kids' toys, so that there isn't any soil on it if they're using those outside. So the action steps that I did want to include, just to kind of hammer the message home, is that for you guys that work for agencies, just to spread the word about lead poison prevention, and reducing kids' exposure to lead in the home, schools, anywhere they play, child care facilities. Also to make sure that kids get tested at least 3 times before the age of 3, making sure that they get tested on a regular basis. That'll let you know if they are being exposed to any sources of lead, so that you can take care of those exposures. And also, if you're doing any type of renovation, repair, or painting in your home, to use lead-safe work practices, especially if the home is built before 1978, and to hire somebody that's certified in the renovation, repair, and painting rule. We have EPA does certify contractors to make sure that they are using lead-safe work practices. So make sure that you are hiring those contractors if they're going to work in your house and there's a pregnant woman or a kid under the age of 6. So the resources that I did want to provide today, because this is Children's Health Month, is about our Children's Health contacts. I provided the contacts for all of the regions. They're here. For Region 5, Marianne Suero, she's our contact, and I did have the web address for the Children's Health Program if you guys want to find out more information about what they offer and what resources they have. Here are the other websites about the schools and a lot of the things that EPA does in schools to prevent kids from being exposed to any toxic chemicals or anything like that. So those websites are available, and there's a lot of resources on those websites. And also the America's Children and the Environment. This is a website. It's called ACE. It talks about environmental contaminants or conditions that can affect kids, biomonitoring, has a lot of information about health effects and any other supplementary topics on environmental concerns. And the other thing that I wanted to offer as a resource is the PACEU, which is the National Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit. They've been very helpful helping out Region 5 with our lead crisis or responses that we've been having here. They're co-funded by EPA and ATSDR. They are available in each region, and I think I have their information here on the next slide, where you guys can contact your PACEU contact. They have a toll-free number, a direct number, and they all have a website, so if you want to go to those websites and see what other resources they may have and what they offer. And I have them for all of the regions. And just to remind everybody that National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week is October 23rd to the 29th. So, to encourage folks to get their homes tested if they want to know if they have lead in their paint, lead paint in their walls or anything like that. To remind folks to get their child tested, to learn more about drinking water, to find out how to get your kind of like your reports on what your drinking water quality is, and just to overall understand the facts of lead. How it affects kids, and I think the message that I want to get across on this webinar is that it's still like a really harmful toxin to kids, and just to make sure that if you guys are working in agencies or health departments across the country, to make sure that people are getting their kids tested. So if there's any questions for me, there's my information. I'm available at any time via phone or email. And that's all I have today.
Okay, thank you, Tammy, and thank you, Alan, for kicking things off with the coordination between EJ and Children's Health. We do have some questions for you. The first one is, with regard to urban vegetable gardens, is there a concern that vegetables absorb lead from the soil?
That's come up a lot, and I think from the research, it's more about, we're more concerned with the soil versus the absorption or the uptake in the vegetables. So I would be more concerned about, how clean you clean your vegetables or fruit versus being concerned about the uptake or what exposures you may get there.
Thank you, Tammy. And again, as a reminder to everyone, again, the Q&A pod is in the middle section on the left-hand side of your screen. Please be sure to put any questions that you have there. There was also a comment that was sent, Tammy, I don't know if you want to just respond. It said that Venetian blinds are another source of lead. Can you speak to that?
I can't speak to that. I'm not 100% sure because, I guess it would depend on the manufacturer of those Venetian blinds. So I guess that's something I can take a note on and look more into if anybody wants to follow up with me on that. But I don't have any specific knowledge of specifically Venetian blinds being a source of lead.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. Are there plants that can be used to uptake lead?
As someone who also works in the remediation world, I think that there was kind of like a push to do more kind of green remediation where we plant trees or things like that to try to take up the contamination from the soil or whatnot. But I can say for my program, we haven't had a lot of success with that. And again, I am not the expert on what type of plants that you can plant to uptake lead, but I can just say from our experience in doing remediation, we haven't seen a lot of success with that.
Any other questions for us?
No, I think that's it, Alan. We're going to go ahead and move forward. I'm sorry, I think I forgot to remove myself from the mute. But there are no more questions for the lead program in Region 5. Thank you so much for providing the information and the resources today. We're going to move along to our next presenters, but before we do, I just want to remind everyone about the survey question that is posted in the top left pod on your screen. Please be sure to share ideas about additional EJ-specific topics that you want to learn about for our future webinars. In addition, at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll find access to the resources and materials from today's session. Again, the presentation is provided, and there are some resources that are tied to each of the presentations. Any additional comments or questions will be taken later. And so at this time, we are going to go ahead and move on to our final speakers, our partners in the federal family from representing DOT today. We have Seth Lajeunesse, who is the Associate Director for the National Center for Safe Routes to School with the UNC Chapel Hill Highway Safety Research Center. Following Seth will be Cookie Leffler. She's the Safe Routes to School Coordinator with the Mississippi Department of Transportation. They'll be highlighting USDOT's Safe Routes to School program and how it continues to demonstrate success in reaching disadvantaged communities. Again, please remember to type your questions in the Q&A pod so that we can answer those following this session. Seth and Cookie, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Siobhan. This is Seth Lajeunesse, as Siobhan said. I'm the Associate Director here at the National Center for Safe Routes to School. We receive funding from the Federal Highway Administration. That's how we're kind of related to the USDOT. I just want to thank Siobhan and Janine for inviting us to be part of this. And I think it's really fitting that it's called Home to School and Back Again, because that's something that we definitely take a close look at, as how kids get to and from school as part of the Safe Routes to School program. What I'll talk about today really is how Safe Routes, as we've been able to see it function in lower income and underserved communities. We have some indications that, in fact, these communities are being served, and there's some good reasons why we should serve them, of course, from an equity standpoint. Just for those who aren't familiar maybe with Safe Routes to School, just a brief history of the funding of it. It was established with a transportation authorization called Safety Lou in 2005. Safe Routes was set up as a standalone program. This is the first time in history that something like this focusing on children and active transportation existed. And then also in the legislation, they required that each state have a full-time Safe Routes to School coordinator. So again, very unique. One of the things we want to note is that as of the end of the summer, we are seeing still that there are 45 states with unobligated Safety Lou funds. So there's still an opportunity to use some of these original funds. And then as we move through time, starting in July 2012, we moved to a kind of a shorter bill, MAP 21, which essentially transformed Safe Routes to School. It became less a standalone program and became an eligible activity under another program called Transportation Alternatives. It also did not require a Safe Routes to School coordinator, but it also empowered metropolitan planning organizations and regions within states to actually set up their own Safe Routes to School programs. So this was also kind of a precedent of empowering these metropolitan planning organizations to engage with communities about Safe Routes to School. And more recently, we have the FAST Act. In December 2015, we transitioned to the FAST Act, which really kept a lot of the identity of Safe Routes to School under MAP 21 and put it into a different program called the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program for Transportation Alternatives. So it operates very much the same way, just some small changes, but again, it's money that goes to the states and to these metropolitan planning organizations to do funding. So that's just a basic overview of that. One of the things that we can look at, because we set up this a system where we can collect information on school travel at a lot of the schools that receive Safe Routes to School funding, we know that of those students who are walking, the average length they're walking is about 1/2 of a mile. And that we also know from the literature that about, around 4th grade, it takes the average 4th grader about 20 minutes to walk a mile. So what this translates to is that if children are required to, are recommended of acquiring 60 minutes of physical activity every day, if the average 4th grader walks to and from school, they're walking for 20 minutes and therefore getting about 1/3 of their recommended physical activity. So one of the other things we do as the National Center for Safe Routes to School is we organize International Walk to School Day. It's now just entered its 20th year, and we just had it on October 5th with some really significant participation. We have about 4,700 schools registered right now, and we're counting registrations through the end of this month. We actually call this Walk Month in our field. And so basically, Walk to School Day, it started in a couple of cities, in Chicago and Los Angeles in 1997, and has since spread to all states, including also Puerto Rico, and we're talking England and Canada, and many European countries. It's spread globally, really. It's seen record participation each year. You can see this graphic here, how it's gone from, under 2,000 to over 5,000 schools participating in it. And what we see when we survey people who do Walk to School Day, that it really does stand as kind of an experimental, a starting point for policy and engineering changes. And some research suggests, too, that when there's promotion like this, Walk to School Day, that it has impact on how kids are getting to and from school even weeks after the event. Because of the data that we collect, we're able to look at trends over time, essentially since 2007. The latest report we have will be coming out really soon, tracks what's happened in school travel among data collecting schools from 2007 to 2014. This is a sample of about 6,500 schools all across the U.S. We saw among these schools that walking to school increased by 28%, and then back home it increased about 21%. Biking at this time kind of stabilized right around 2% during this time. So one of the things we're also able to look at when we look at these trends is also the kind of socio-demographics of the schools that are submitting these data to us. So when we look at how we define schools by income based upon the percentage of students eligible to receive free and reduced price lunch, we can categorize them according to kind of income strata. We see that, as you can see in this figure, that lower income schools, they have a greater propensity of students there to walk to these schools. And a lot of them are in urban areas and in high concentrations of kind of people of color in communities. We see that it increased across school incomes, but it really increased among lower income over time, lower income schools. Another thing we can look at is when these data are collected, so the season in which they're collected. One of the interesting things that we came out of this last trends report is that in the winter, so though walking increased over time, it didn't really increase among certain income strata over time. So when you look at medium and high income, it's sort of flatlined, suggesting that they might be sensitive to colder weather or what have you. But when you look at lower income, it actually increased, even though it looks like it's jumping up and down. When you look at the trend, that is definitely an increase that we have over time. Another thing we can look at is how far are students walking to and from school. So this is a graph showing the probability of walking to school by income and by the distance that the children live from school. And you see again here that lower income schools, they tend to walk farther away. They're more likely at each category of distance from school, they're more likely than their wealthier counterparts to walk to school. So this suggests too that they are exposed to traffic risk, traffic dangers, personal security concerns for longer periods of time than the wealthier counterparts as well. So here's some other things about school. They're more likely, as you know, the lower income school students attending these schools are more likely than wealthier counterparts to walk. They walk longer distance on average. So when we looked at the average, it's over 1/2 a mile versus the medium and high income schools, it's under 1/2 of a mile on average where they walk. And they're more likely, as we saw, in colder weather. This, of course, suggests that walking is less of a choice in lower income communities, that suggests. So considering these travel patterns among the low income schools, we are heartened to find when we look at these state reported projects, the Safe Routes to School projects, where this money is going, that 70% of those that are listed in the project list reported to us by the state coordinators, like Cookie, who we'll hear from in a minute, we're going to Title I schools where there's high proportions of students and families experiencing poverty. This is more than what we see nationwide. So it's good to see that the funding is going to these places. And then we will look at also the amount of the awards. It closely matches the distribution we see of Title I schools. So 69% of the more than $1.5 billion as part of the Safe Routes School Program awarded to schools have gone to Title I. So how is this happening? This is really given a dedicated, intentional efforts from the states, we're finding. We've been talking with the coordinators over the years to find out how they're doing this, and we know the researchers like Angie Craddock at Harvard, she's looked at this, and it really comes down to 5 kind of key approaches. So one would be awareness and education of the fact that these funds exist, and going out into communities and letting people know, educating about the opportunities for the funding. Funding match, starting with MAP 21 in 2012, What happened is it went from being 100% federally funded to 80%. And then, so these applying communities then had to come up with 20%. A lot of states have stepped in and said that we can provide the 20% local match. And then the point priority, this was when they receive applications that they give extra points, extra weight to applications coming from traditionally underserved communities. And then the last two really relate to kind of the direct services that the states are providing these communities. Project administration, a lot of times, especially with federal projects, given environmental reporting requirements, it could be overly burdening to these communities. So states have come in and provided a lot of assistance with that, and even gone in and done some of the administrative work for these communities. And then likewise with the engineering services. A lot of communities lack staff and resources to actually engage and do a lot of the design work for the projects. So states have come in and provided their expertise for disadvantaged communities. These are just some of the reasons, the most common reasons. But we're just very pleased to see how, we've been able to monitor the implementation of Safe Routes to School across the country, and we see that it is in fact reaching places that really are deserving of the funding. I'm just going to leave that with my contact information if you'd like to talk offline about anything related to the Safe Routes program, and leave it at that.
Hello, this is Cookie Leffler. I work for the Mississippi Department of Transportation as the Safe Routes to Schools coordinator. And since 2006, when the Safe Routes to Schools program began, MDOT has awarded $15 million to 46 projects in 37 communities and 10 statewide projects. 110 schools have directly benefited from these projects, and 86% of those schools are considered low income by the federal free and reduced lunch standards, which we collect as a part of the application process. Oops. Site visits to schools and communities around the state often include observing arrival and dismissal at schools and seeing images like what you see here, emphasizing the importance of the Safe Routes to School program. On one of my first days as Safe Routes to School coordinator, someone told me that if we make it safer for kids to walk and bike to school, we make it safer for everyone in that community to walk and bike. That has stuck with me ever since. And so I'd like to share with you a few projects where you can see this happen. In the small city of Verona, the elementary school serves not only elementary students, but also serves as the bus transportation hub for all middle and high school Verona students to load and unload buses every day, every school day, meaning there are a lot of walkers to and from school. The school sits on one side of an active rail crossing with most of the businesses and services along with housing located on the other side of the tracks, which would be to the west, along State Highway 145. The city and MDOT successfully worked with the rail company and the MDOT HSIP program, which is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, to design and construct a safe pedestrian crossing over the railroad tracks. Also, through the Safe Routes program, walkers now have sidewalks leading from the elementary school across the tracks to newly constructed sidewalks and crosswalks with PED signals, pedestrian signals, along Highway 145. And therefore, they have safer access to houses, to businesses, to services and food, in addition to the school. Oh, looks like the slide got cut off at the top. The city of Tupelo, they received Safe Routes to School funds to construct sidewalks in the vicinity of Tupelo Middle School and Pierce Street School, which these two schools are located in densely populated areas. In phase one of the project, which is seen in the colored map to the right, one goal was to construct new sidewalks that connect the schools with the walking track that already exists in Hancock Park to give students and others access to the area west of the park, which is shown in the lightly colored map. Not having this connection prevented many Tupelo Middle School students from being able to safely walk to school. So in phase 2 of the project, we were able to construct that connection down Ida Street, which is the long street there in the colored map, west to the track in Hancock Park, and then continue west to Thomas Street School, which is seen all the way to the left of the screen. In addition to connecting these neighborhoods, our statewide partner, the Mississippi State Department of Health, worked with the school district and the city to develop and implement a shared use agreement so that the community now has access to the facilities at Tupelo Middle School, which is the only middle school in the city of Tupelo. The City of Starkville has used various funding opportunities like Safe Routes to Schools funds and the Transportation Alternative Program funds that Seth mentioned, and its own resources to create a network of sidewalks and multi-use trails to move people from many neighborhoods, including those dependent on walking and public transit, connecting them to services located downtown and what the city has created and dubbed the Health Services Corridor. The low-income neighborhood where the Safe Routes to School infrastructure improvements were made now through the city and federal funds connect not only to the schools in the area but also to downtown, the Health Services Corridor, Mississippi State University, various food places like either grocery stores or restaurants, and more. The city and the community have committed to creating a Healthy Starkville, the Healthy Starkville Initiative, and it's making a difference. Since 2006, when I started with MDOT and in partnership with Starkville in Motion, the city has become a place that supports active transportation and has this new energy and momentum because of their efforts. And then through collaborations with Bike Walk Mississippi, the Mississippi Museum of Art, the University of Mississippi Medical Center, which is the largest employer in the city of Jackson, which is our capital, the Mississippi State Department of Health, and local neighborhood associations, the city of Jackson has worked with the Jackson Public Schools, which is the largest urban school district in the state, to make improvements along West Capitol Street, which is a major corridor in a low-income area. The construction of sidewalks and pedestrian crossings along West Capitol Street will not only serve kids walking to and from Barr Elementary, which you can see in the top left corner of the map, which is also located on West Capitol Street, which incidentally, Barr has no busing due to its student population located within a half a mile of the school. But also, this project is going to serve kids traveling to the Boys and Girls Club in the afternoon from Barr, and another elementary school called Poindexter, which is located just off Capitol Street. The Boys and Girls Club, I'm afraid you can't see it on this map, but the Boys and Girls Club is also located on West Capitol Street. Others living in the neighborhoods off of Capitol, once construction is completed this year, will have safe access to the local grocery store, vital community services, and shelters, which are right near that grocery store, and then to the nearby Jackson Area Transportation Authority, which is critical for this particular area. So we were happy to play a part in making those connections. And then in the city of Meridian, we've had great success with this project. We were able to construct sidewalks, which you can see in the map are the darker, the heavier black lines. We have access now from you have Harris Elementary School and Carver Middle School located along a creek, and the creek runs right down the middle of the map, and now they have access from both sides, the east and the west of the schools, to travel to 8th Street, which is circled in yellow. 8th Street has a lot of the services needed, post office, doctor's offices, churches, restaurants, And then we were also able to put a pedestrian bridge over the creek right there up at Harris Elementary School, which is circled in red. And this pedestrian bridge carries kids from Harris Elementary School over to the east side of the school and takes them up to the Boys and Girls Club. And then on the east side of Carver Elementary School, we were able to use a road diet and add sidewalks so that kids can safely walk on that side of the school, which has a lot of geographic issues, a lot of hills, and you lose a lot of sight distance on that side of the project. The Public Works Director in the City of Meridian explained to us that neighbors were not quite very welcoming of this project, but once they saw the sidewalks and everything that it offered the community, that they were very excited and very supportive and wanted to see more sidewalks in other neighborhoods as well. With the Safe Routes to School project, they made sure that the area was visually designed for walkers by putting signage you can see in the photo at the bottom, putting up signage throughout the neighborhood to let your vehicle operators know that there are kids walking and they needed to slow down and be safe. And there were a lot of well-planned activities by the city. They created a Safe Routes to School committee. This committee has been responsible for planning Walk to School Day. They attend PTO meetings. They had a parent university with the school district. And there are a lot of different groups that are participating in this committee, not only at the City of Meridian and the Meridian Public Schools, but also the local veterans, local churches in the area. The ROTC from the high school participates, and they will also be participating in Bike to School Day in the spring. So this has been a really successful project, and we've had a lot of fun watching it happen. They even participated in the Christmas parade to get kids to encourage kids to be able to walk and bike to school. And that's really all I have to cover today. Thank you very much for having me on as a part of the webinar.
Well, thank you, Cookie. We appreciate having you, and thank you so much, Seth, also for the information that you've provided today. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and go over some of the questions that have come in through the QA pod. And as a reminder to everyone, please submit your questions through the Q&A pod. We had a couple of that disappeared, but if you don't hear your question answered, please submit it again so we can be sure to get someone to respond to you. So with that, there is a question about finding out how to get Safe Routes to Schools funds. And this is to Seth, and obviously, Cookie, you can jump in if necessary. How do our stakeholders find out if their local school districts and city governments have or are using Safe Routes to School funds?
That's a terrific question. Whoever posed that, that's a terrific question. Oh, I see. I think it's Tamara that posed that. Yeah, we on our website, saferoutesinfo.org, that's the website for the National Center for Safe Routes to School. At the very top of it, there's a link that says Find State Contacts. That will take you to a page that has an interactive map where you click on your state. And on that page on the right-hand side you can look at the funded projects. It's a big list of projects that the state coordinators have put in information on. In there, usually the recipient of the funds, it tends to be a municipality or a county, entities like that. There are some circumstances, though, where districts might have gotten some funding. But what you'll see in that funding list, you'll see essentially the congressional district that it's located in. You'll see the city and state, and then there's also a link to see the schools that are impacted. So you can see all that information and also the date at which it was kind of awarded, which was essentially how we define when a state publicly announces that a school or city or district will receive the funds.
Okay, thank you, Seth. Also, there's another question in regards to funds. I'm sorry, please bear with me. We're experiencing a few technical difficulties at this time. So yes, Seth, there was questions about the Transportation Alternatives Program and then also the Surface Transportation Block Grant. Can you provide any information to on those and their relationship to the Safe Routes to School program?
Certainly. Yeah, the how Safe Routes to School relates to either of those programs. So most states still have the Transportation Alternative Program funds, which is from the previous transportation bill. And then the newer one is that block grant program that Siobhan just mentioned. But Safe Routes to School, including funding a state coordinator, doing the different like educational activities, encouragement activities, law enforcement of speeds and other things in school zones, and then engineering treatments, actual changes to the built environment. All of those are considered what are called eligible activities under those programs. So either Transportation Alternatives Programs or the Surface Transportation Program Block Grant for Transportation Alternatives. And basically each state has its own kind of parameters through which it will receive applications for funding for whatever it may be, that local municipalities or counties or nonprofits can apply for the newer transportation, those newer transportation funds. So Safe Routes to School, again, is just, it depends on the state how they administer the program. Some identify projects, funded projects as Safe Routes to School, where others do not, but it could be that it benefits schools. Though it's not identified as Safe Routes to School program, if that makes sense. But yeah, again, if you have my contact information, by all means, if you have specific questions about funding, feel free to get in touch with me.
Okay, thanks again, Seth. So I wanted to go back to a few of the questions that we received that came in for our partners in Region 5. So Tammy, if you're still with us, I've got a few questions for you that came in through the pod. So the first question is, are there any plans that you are aware of to remove lead from airplane and racing fuel? So it looks, I'm sorry everyone, it looks like our Tammy from Region 5 has already logged off or been disconnected in some form or fashion. So we're going to go ahead and move along, and we'll make sure that those questions do get answered directly following the presentation. So with that, that actually concludes our presentations today as it relates directly to in children's environmental health and how we're working together within the federal family. We do have a question that we'd like to pose finally for the group today, for today's session. We want you to think about how the Environmental Justice Interagency Working Group can help bridge the digital gap, the digital divide. You can provide your ideas, or you can respond through the Q&A pod. Also, feel free to contact Janine Finley directly. Her email is provided on the slide currently in front of you. Again, we are trying to find out ways that we can provide access to more information, resources, and of course, help everyone as we try to connect with people from different regions and then also different demographics. I want to remind everyone about the survey question that's found in the left-hand pod to the top about what kind of webinars you want to hear about, what information is being shared. We want to make sure that we're providing, again, as much information to as many communities as possible. And then, of course, there's the resources from today's webinar at the bottom. In closing, I do want to thank all of our presenters and everyone who logged in to listen to the information that we were providing today about children's environmental health. Due to their unique activity patterns, physiology, and windows of susceptibility, children are more likely to be at risk from environmental hazards than adults. Children in communities with environmental justice concerns have increased vulnerability for pollution exposure. And I want you to think about, are you doing everything you can do individually to protect children from environmental health risks? We will continue the Access and Awareness webinar series next month. As mentioned earlier, these webinars are held on the second Thursday of every month. Our next webinar is November 10th, and we're going to be talking about collaborative place-based initiatives and the importance of synergy with all stakeholders during these initiatives. Following that in December, we'll have our Improving Wastewater Infrastructure webinar, and we'll be talking specifically about how we need to improve this in vulnerable communities. For access to the recordings of these webinars, we'd like you to check out the EJ IWG Webpage. The link here is provided. It's also been provided to you in the chat box. In addition to that, Sandra Howard did provide the link to the President's Task Force website that is also provided to you in the chat box. And then lastly, we want to make sure that you stay connected with us. Please join the EPA EJ listserv. That link is provided here. Follow us on Twitter at EPA Justice. And then lastly, again, the link is provided for the EJ IWG webpage. There you'll find information about the Interagency Working Group, how we collaborate together, and how we work to address environmental justice in communities across the nation. Thank you. We appreciate everyone for listening, and we hope to see you next month.